The Optimists Club. There must have been a day somewhere in the 14th century when the King of England was actually in touch with everything that concerned his country. There must have been a date somewhere in history when it actually became too complex for a leader to keep all the moving parts in check. Since then, the flood of information has only increased and increased to a point where it's not possible for one person to hold everything and make decisions whilst being in full control of all of the facts. There's a rather coarse joke that goes, we had kingdoms where the rulers were our kings. Then we had empires where the rulers were emperors. And now we have countries. Anyway, there are so many examples of mismanagement of our lives by rulers with big ideas. The most obvious for me is Chairman Mao during the Great Leap Forward, where his astonishing policy was dreamt up to stop the birds from eating the rice crops. Mao declared that on one day the whole of China was to kill birds. People were told to beat drums, pots and pans all day until the birds dropped dead of exhaustion. That year, millions of birds died. The insect population thrived with no natural predator, and the rice crop was wiped out. Millions died of starvation. I'm not a great believer in history per se, preferring to look forward rather than back. I understand that things can be cyclical, and I know that what's been, we can then forecast what might come. Forewarned is forearmed. I also believe that forecasting the big events is virtually impossible. Who can put their hands up to say they were able to forecast the fall of the USSR? We live in a world of free will, and every one of us marches to our own drum from time to time. We also see that the tiniest crack in the dam can bring the whole edifice crashing down. I've just completed Yuval Noah Harari's astonishing book, Sapiens. Few books have impressed me as much as this incredible work. The sheer size and sweep of the project is mind-blowing. To be able to hold the vastness of humanity in one's head and then offer perspective is a feat of genius. This is the first time that I have ever felt that I truly understand humanity and what makes it tick. He moves from the discovery of fire to the advent of farming. He charts the power of money and the huge influence that science has exerted on the last 200 years. We rove through most major religions and empires, passing finally through Buddhism. It's interesting to see Harari's wearied eye as he sorts through human traits. He says, given the proven human propensity for misusing power, it seems naive to believe that the more clout people have, the happier they will be. It's a common theme that carries from section to section. Why is it that it's so difficult for us to behave well to each other? We are told that it's deeply entrenched in our reptilian brains to fear the other. Politicians have always known that if they can separate peoples, they can then control them. It's playing to our worst fears and using them against us. We're prone to circle the wagons and exclude anybody who's not like us as soon as the going gets tough. It's a deep tribal instinct. But that in itself is a false construct. We see that the family was the building block of society, but then the Industrial Revolution profited from breaking the family bonds and rebuilding them in different ways. Country is something that we rally behind, but But in reality, even in our own village, there are people who one has nothing in common with. We can be deeply suspicious of people from up north when we live down south, and vice versa, but then suddenly be galvanised as British as soon as a threat comes to our country. Harari's exposition of science is truly eye-opening, and how it interweaves with politics. Politics funds science, which in turn returns new powers to politics. He talks about the brave new world theory of biochemistry. One side of his argument has us as sentient beings searching for pleasure, searching for meaning. The other side, just looking for a chemical hit to make ourselves feel good. He says, we can stop wasting our time on politics and social reform, pooches and ideologues, and focus instead on the only thing that makes us truly happy, manipulating our biochemistry. Later, when he examines Buddhism, we see other motivations. He says, happiness consists in seeing one's life in its entirety as a meaningful and worthwhile. But then from the Buddhist perspective, he says, live in the present moment instead of fantasizing about what might have been or what might be. And that true happiness is also independent of our inner feelings. Stop the pursuit of external achievements, but also the pursuit of inner feelings. Every major thought form has had a view on how we might best progress as a race. Be it Christianity, Nazism, or consumerism, there's an underlying suggestion, or an exceptionally overt suggestion, of how we should lead our lives. Time and time again, we've flirted with these ways of being, these schools of thought, and have watched them peak and fail. Inevitably, a huge number of people become convinced that this is the way, the truth, and the light. Shortly after, the feelings trough and something new comes along. We're faddists. We follow like sheep. It's rare that we ever come up with original thought. The few who do normally have a huge impact, as it seems the others are too lazy to bother doing their own thinking. There's one thing that struck me as I read this engrossing book. He uses an image of personality types. He suggests that we're almost like air conditioning units. Some people have a setting of 7 and will sometimes reach 9 and sometimes be down at 5. There are others who are normally at 5, who will never get above 7, but may go down to 3 also. Throughout time, we've had optimists and pessimists. I put myself firmly in the can-do camp. I play in a pétanque team, the French game also known as boule. I'm often teamed up with partners who act as my brake. I understand that I judge the situation with a positive potential outcome, but very often that needs to be tempered by some grounding too. I'll say, well, if we hit this one, then it'll leave us with 4 points. And my colleague will say, yeah, but if you hit our ball by mistake, that'll give the opponent 3 points. If one thing is true about life, it's that we will always have optimists, pessimists, and the middle-of-the-road club. It's yin and yang theory of everything. There will always be kind people helping. There will always be bad people taking advantage. Greed seems to be the order of the day currently, but in recent memory we lived in a very frugal way. The world has been exceptionally violent, but recently has had massive bouts of peace. It's interesting that even a small war can occupy the whole world's attention, when wars used to be between the whole world itself. Large corporations are encouraged to rape the land, pocket the cash, whilst organisations like the United Nations support and feed many millions. We tend to look at life through a very short lens. Of course, our lens is our life. We're only here for 70 years and 10 or 80 years. It's difficult to see or feel the depth of history, which is why I am so indebted to Yuval Noah Harari. However, I do have one criticism to level at Mr. Harari's work. Perhaps not a criticism as such, but rather an addendum. I've written many times of the work of Dr. Pang Ming, he of the Medicineless Hospital outside Beijing. His first work was to show people how to heal themselves using Qigong. It's a slow process, but fortunately a scholar like Dr. Pang was there to observe and analyse. He developed his understandings and therapies around the power of our minds, rightly understanding that if we can bring our minds into the healing process, that it becomes much more powerful, permanent and quick. It always brings to mind the stories of American Indians seeing a sign and knowing that it was time for them to move on to the next happy hunting ground. They would say their goodbyes and then go out into the wilderness, lie down and die, just as it said elephants choose to do. We hear stories of witches putting curses on people and those people dying just because of the power of the witch's word. Dr. Pang realised that if we can change the voices in our heads, that we can then turn the power of our minds to heal ourselves rather than kill ourselves. With this type of experimental thought came a deep dive into Taoism and Buddhism and Confucianism, and I have no doubt lots of other thought schools too. I believe that ultimately Dr. Pang has found his own personal path to enlightenment. His work now has, and really has only ever had, one purpose, and that is to help people experience their true selves. His chosen tool was initially Qigong, but has branched out into other paths such as meditation, contemplation and philosophy. It's not important how you get there, only that you try. Whatever tool you choose to use, and I always come back to Socrates, a life unexamined is a life unlived. What is true self? I think you have to find it out for yourself. I've seen glimpses of what I think may be true self moments. It's now my life's focus too. I have retired from active teaching to dedicate myself to this. Well, I still run classes because they're my joy. I still write nonsense because I find it fun. It keeps the grey matter ticking over. And I'm still writing and filming little teaching courses because it has no stress. My teacher Lou, explains the following with a diagram. He draws two circles beside each other. One is full of squiggles and dots and lines. The other serene and empty. He then takes a different coloured pen and puts a dot in the middle of the busy circle. He says, "This dot is you, and the lines and the squiggles are the chaos you face every single day." He points out you can't see all the dots and all the squiggles because everything is so chaotic. In order to gain perspective, you have to find a way to put yourself in the other circle. He duly puts a lone dot in the serene circle. This is what meditation helps us to do. It brings us to a quiet mind state. But I think we need to go beyond meditation, which is where most practitioners stop, and find contemplation. We spend time as consciousness. We find a way to take ourselves beyond the duality of daily life and step back into the singularity of universal consciousness. That's where I'm headed and what I'm teaching these days. This is the only evolution of sapiens that can possibly take us above the daily selfishness and greed that we seem to be hardwired for. I have long mentioned about becoming an intronaut and eventually changing the path of our species. Just as we moved from Neanderthal to Homo sapiens, now it's time to move to Homo spiritualis, as I've named our new evolution. This, as I see it, is the only way that humanoids can survive the coming years. More of the same will only see us destroy ourselves. A new way of being is required. To my mind, Dr. Pang is pointing the way, and I am following the breadcrumb trail.